This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. This is your host, Rob Port, of course, with you 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If you listen to the podcast, you know that. In a moment, going to talk with a gentleman. He's going to be the headmaster. I love that term. That's a very British term, right? That's a very like Harry Potter type term. The headmaster of Capstone Academy, Paul Q. Fisher. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But before we do, first of all, this is the first time I've recorded the podcast since we lost Attorney General Wayne Stenjum. I wrote a column about him that was published this morning, Monday, as I'm recording this, and just a terrible loss. I just feel like, although I certainly went rounds with Wayne sometimes when I didn't like one of his legal opinions or something, I thought his approach to his duties of office was just so much exactly what we need right now. He was the epitome of a public servant. He served with humility, with dignity, with honor, and losing him was so tragic. It was when I would talk to people, because of course he was going to be on the ballot and people weren't sure if he was going to run for re-election. And so I'm, as I do because of what I do for a living, I'm making calls in political circles asking people, do you think he's going to run? And most people would tell me that they thought he was going to retire. And when they said that, they would always have a little smile or a little gleam in their eye. And thinking back on it, it made me think that they were kind of envious of him to have had a 40-year career in politics like he did, and one that was as consequential as it was. I interviewed him for this podcast about his retirement not that long ago, a few weeks ago. It's still hard for me, frankly, to think of him in the past tense at this point. But, he talked about the things he did, developing North Dakota's open records and open meeting laws when he was in the legislature, enforcing those laws as Attorney General, developing the crime lab. North Dakota didn't have a crime lab when he became Attorney General. How weird is that? This era we're living in with true crime and DNA testing and everything else going on. When Wayne Stenjum took office as Attorney General in 2001, North Dakota didn't have a crime lab. He built it. Just an amazing career and an amazing man. And it's hard. It's hard to say goodbye. I wish he had gotten his retirement. I think everybody was thinking of him traveling the world with his wife, Beth. They had just such a famously wonderful relationship, and he doesn't get to do that now. And that's a terrible thing. But we're going to set that aside, moving past that sad thought. As always, if you're tuning into this, streaming or something on Facebook, if you would consider subscribing to the podcast via an app like Spotify. Boy, Spotify's in the news a lot right now. But I'm still on Spotify, so you can certainly subscribe to me there. I'm on all the different, this show's on all the different podcasting platforms. So just search on one, subscribe. You'll get notified when there's new episodes. Leave a rating or a review if the platform allows that. That always helps out quite a bit. And of course, consider subscribing. I write for a living, and the way we make money doing this stuff is by you subscribing to our content. So if you go to one of our publications, the Fargo Forum, Grand Forks Herald, Jamestown Sun, Dickinson Press, you subscribe to one, you get them all. And that's a pretty good deal. So check that out. All right. Having gone through all of that, Mr. Fisher, thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, glad to be here, Rob. Thanks for the invitation.
Capstone Academy. Tell me, how did this get off the ground? How did this idea come together?
Yeah, it's the founding team is made up of board members and then friends in the community who really looked at things that were happening in our country and even locally in the community, and particular lack of leadership, lack of good civil discourse, lack of rational debate on issues. And they thought, maybe we could do better for our young people, and we could raise up a generation that could engage and do this better than our generation is getting it done. And part of what they did was say, what's changed in education over the years. And one of the founding couples of the school had a son who went to Hillsdale College, and he really appreciated the classical approach that he got to the liberal arts there. And he came home inspired and said, I wish I'd had this kind of education accessed in Fargo when I was growing up. And he didn't. So he planted that seed. Luke Robson is his name. And his parents were having coffee with other members in the community, and they were having conversations with other members. And before long, there was this idea that there's not a classical school in our area, purely classical. And so they explored starting one. And there's a lot of local support. The entire project is local, from people who've grown up or been in North Dakota for decades.
Let's. I guess you said you brought that up. Because there's been, I don't know why it provokes this, but some people are upset at the idea that a project like this would be going forward. So first of all, let's address the first thing, because I think part of it is people think, well, if you're building a private school, that must mean you don't like our public schools. And I think North Dakotans rightly take a lot of pride in their public schools. I think for the most part, we have wonderful teachers, we have wonderful schools and administrators. It's a lot of people trying to do the good thing. And, a project like this, it's like, are you guys saying our private schools aren't good enough? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, I think it's saying that those schools aren't offering classical education. And one of the things about Capstone is that it's a Christian education as well. So it is a particular worldview that does influence some of the approach to not just the methods in the classroom, but also to some extent selection of content. And I think we know in this country, if you're going to have a school that has a religious bent of any kind, if you believe in a transcendent purpose for the things that you're teaching, you might have to do that in a private method because you just can't publicly fund that, particularly if it appears to be sectarian. In our case, we're as broadly Christian as you can be, but just too intentionally Christian to be a publicly funded school. And so that's one reason that a school like ours would start, and that's one reason why it can't be in the public sector. I think there's a sense in which we believe part of what we're doing is raising up people who will teach in public schools, people who will coach in public schools, and who will maybe send their kids to public schools. All of us are products of public schools. And we will always have, as long as education is currently structured the way it is in this country, it will always be the public schools that shape the future of the country. And so we have a vested interest in that. It's not, but this option can't and won't be available in a publicly funded school.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because there's the other thing. We just came through School Choice Week was last week, and that's always again, in fact, last week on Wednesday I had Nick Archuleta on from North Dakota United. That's the state's public worker and teacher union, and you can imagine how they feel about the idea of vouchers. They have a pretty they're not real big fans of it, but which interested me, Hillsdale College, which I think you guys are partnering with for like helping develop like curriculum and things like that, if I'm not misstating that. They kind of famously don't take federal money. They don't take government money. Would you guys, like if North Dakota were to create a voucher program, would you guys accept that?
We would evaluate it. It all depends on how the legislation's written, right? The challenge for us is making our education accessible to as many families as possible. And so the hurdle to that is always going to be getting enough philanthropic interest so that we can help students of any means come to the school. And for our founders, that's deep at the heart of what grieves us about access to education like ours, is that it's often an obstacle that can't be overcome. And we have a gregarious and philanthropic group that's making scholarships a focus, need-based scholarships. But we don't know if we would sign on to a voucher program to be recipients of tax dollars.
And what's the fear there, that there'd be strings attached, that the government's going to say?
Yeah, that there might be regulation. The joy of working in private education is the lack of regulation. And a better way to put that would probably be freedom, and independence to create what the parents who are selecting your school desire for their students to receive. And you lose that, at times. Now, I come from a state that's bluer, certainly than North Dakota originally, in Pennsylvania. And there's tremendous tax dollars being diverted to private schools. We might have a different opinion on whether that's a good idea or not, but I certainly feel like when that happens, there's always winners and losers on both the private and public end of the spectrum, and none of the solutions are perfect for choice. And so
One of the things you just mentioned was that you would, you're working, and obviously some of this is contingent on being able to raise the money and finding and being
Right.
a prosperous enterprise, because you want to be able to serve first and foremost the students who enroll.
Yeah.
One of the knocks on private schools, and one of the reasons why, and Mr. Archuleta certainly made this argument, they said one of the reasons why they perform so well is you guys get to pick and choose who comes in. And in particular, he said, students with special needs, students who have some sort of maybe a developmental disability or something like that. Special needs students. We all know what we're talking about there. How does your school? Would your school? I mean, you're saying you're committed to, accepting all students. Or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, would you accept students with special needs, or are you prepared to do that?
Yeah, sure we would. You always have to evaluate whether you can serve that student's needs, if you're the best solution or not. Sometimes the local public school is not even the best solution. There are times where they end up funding the student having another alternative. At times in private education, I've had students from the public school placed in our schools, and that includes in a classical Christian model, because something that we were doing was going to be more effective for that student. Now, oftentimes that's because the parent has said through their IEP meetings, this is not a free and accessible public education for my child. It's not the least restrictive environment. And they've been able to make the case that something we're doing is. And so it's not a one size fits all. You have to shop for that education as a parent. Sometimes Capstone will provide that. Sometimes we won't be the best fit. And we tell parents at our information sessions, it's not our job to sell you on this. It's our job to help you find the best fit for your child. Our mission is not to promote ourselves. Our mission is to serve those students that we can serve well. Sometimes we can work well. We've often worked well with kids who are on various ends of the autistic spectrum in our schools. And when I say our, I mean the classical Christian school movement. And not every school does it well, and most students with IEPs in the public school sector have a list of accommodations that private schools that are well funded can typically accommodate.
You mentioned that basically two things that your school is going to be: classical education and Christian.
Right.
Let's start with Christian first. What does that mean? Are non-Christians, well, I'm not Christian. Would my children be welcome there?
Absolutely, yeah. You would have to evaluate as a parent whether you wanted them there, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you're not Christian on principle, you probably don't want to compromise those principles to enroll your child in a school that is going to, whether it's didactically, teach that worldview, or just by virtue of osmosis, being in the culture, and through the books that you read, end up adhering to that worldview and adopting it yourself. So often that happens without thought, right? Worldviews aren't analyzed, they just happen. So putting them in our context might be something you would avoid. But we were in a classical Christian school for 19 years, where I was headmaster before in the Philadelphia area, and we had Muslim and Hindu students in our Christian school. We weren't the kind of school that forced parents to adhere to or ascribe to the faith, but they just needed to be polite company at the school. They needed to be willing not to do things to antagonize. They signed up anyways because they liked the classical model. They like the academic rigor. They like the focus on logic and rhetoric. They like reading the classics. In a sense, they were trying to get something that they thought was competitively an edge for their kids.
Right. You don't need a bunch of atheists.
To put up with the rest.
You don't need a bunch of atheists sending their kids there and then acting all shocked. These people are Christians. What?
Right. Well, I mean, I could pull off, since we can see each other, I could pull off my Richard Dawkins book off the shelf and say they do read God Delusion in our high schools.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important for them to understand people with different points of view, and even to have respect for their arguments when they're good ones. And that's what I think makes classical Christian schools that are a tribute to the name, and not all of them are, but what makes them good is that we don't censor what goes in the kids' hands, and that when they ask questions that stump a devout believer, the believer can say, I don't have an answer for that. That's a good point. We don't want to raise up kids who bring the faith into disrepute by not being intellectually honest, and not having arguments that can withstand rigor. And when they can't, we have to acknowledge that they don't.
The part that really intrigues me is the classical aspect of the education, because I am a few years ago, I was invited to participate in a panel discussion at Minot State University, and the discussion was, I think that they had some kind of a kind of a quirky title for it. I think it was like kicking Shakespeare out of the academy, right? And it was supposed to be like, should we, because they were setting up kind of an either or debate where it was either STEM focused, science, technology, engineering, mathematics,
right,
or literature and art. And I think they were expecting me to come in and be kind of the Philistine and say, no, get, who cares about Shakespeare? Teach everybody math.
right.
And I was not. I feel like we can do both. In fact, I think we should stop creating that dichotomy because I think it's silly. Like, you get really good at math so that you can build beautiful things and be prosperous and then be able to enjoy things like Shakespeare, right? Like, these things are hand in hand. So I really like that idea that, I'm kind of looking at the schools. It seems like we're getting away from some of that. But I guess I want to understand what that means to you. When you say classical education, what does that mean?
Yeah, so part of it, we lead with the idea of wisdom and virtue, but we like to look back. So it's the Greeks that gave us the idea of the true, the good, and the beautiful, and the idea that education is about being fully human, that it's about liberating a person through knowledge and wisdom and virtue, and that those things have to become a part of who we are. And what we look for in classical is methodology and content that helps kids to be inspired to go learn more for its own good, for its own sake. And that, I think that's part of what differentiates us, but that's just a vision. That's not really method, right? So method has to do with engaging students in the bigger questions that motivate them, the things that they want to wrestle with. What we'd done in the standards movement, and in the 90s, I was a young whippersnapper in education, and I really thought the standards movement was great. I was a conservative guy, and I wanted to get away from outcomes-based education, and let's have standards and accountability. But one of the things that did is it kind of reinforced this notion that there's discrete knowledge people have to know, and it's in these compartments that we test on, and they're not really animated or motivated by meaning or purpose, and they're disjointed from the rest of the subjects. And we want kids to learn things in a coherent whole so that they're not frustrated in their coursework, that all of it seems to have meaning and purpose and speaks to their life in ways that are relevant. A classical school seeks to do that not by teaching more things, a wider array of things, but by teaching a few things deeply. And that involves being able to explore those and being able to handle them from different angles. Socratic discussions, sitting around a Harkness table, and if you're reading Macbeth, you're going to have conversations where the students are leading the conversation. The teacher has taught them how to have a real conversation. And I'm going to grade you based upon the substance of what you bring to the table. How well do you listen and ask follow-up questions? Because your questions show me you're listening. Are the questions you ask good questions to begin with? When you came into class, did you bring an analysis to offer that brought the whole class up to a new level in thinking about what you've read? Can you make connections between our experiences today and what's going on in this story? All of those things are part of a classical education. So the great books approach, where you're reading those great books, you don't set them aside because they don't fit into the 21st century marketplace. And you continue to teach Latin and learn Latin. You continue to learn the mythology, because if you read great literature, it's going to reference those things.
Why Latin? Why is it because it's like the Latin languages, obviously, that
Yeah, part of it, and part of it's because it really looks cool and prestigious, right? If you put it on your crest.
Oh God!
No, I know.
Don't say that.
That's what people think when they see it. They think like stuffy. Or the truth is that, in addition to the fact that kids are mostly learning Romantic languages, and a good portion of our language is related to Latin, there's a sense in which when they're studying all of the great works of the past, there's so much that was written in Latin, and great orators and great politicians of the past in Rome spoke in Latin, and they wrote in Latin. So for our students to be able, there's something about going to somebody's native tongue and reading their wisdom and their oratory in the language itself that's powerful. Latin's a great exercise in logic. And so there's a sense in which the language is formulaic. It's a system, and you can mathematically almost put the language together. And kids discover order and beauty in the language. And part of what we believe is that learning exposes kids to things of beauty and wonder. And so it elevates their thinking and it inspires. It's just surprising to people, but it can do that. And we study it in conjunction with understanding Roman history and culture. My coffee table in the office here at the school actually have a book that says Greeks and Romans Bearing Gifts is the title. And the idea is that much of what we enjoy today is built on their accomplishments, and in addition to the brutality that was a part of Rome once they got really successful, and in the corruption there. But we learned from that too. But Latin also, we stopped studying. So they start studying Latin in third grade, and then they get to Wheelock's Latin in sixth grade, which is a pretty hardcore Latin course. And then when they get into the high school, they do study world languages, and we prime their prompt in world languages before that too.
What about? And I mean, listen, you're not going to find a greater admirer of the Greek tradition of philosophy, and I get it. What about people who say there's a lot that's happened since then? And, and there's other, by the way, traditions that are as old or older than the Greeks that have relevance too. What do you, I mean, I guess that's kind of the old dead white men argument, although when we're talking about Mediterranean, I mean, that's white men in quotation marks, but you understand what I'm saying though. I mean, that's kind of the argument is, can't we be more contemporary than this?
I think most people that say that haven't actually spent any time with that content. I don't think you can spend time with it and say this seems somehow dated, irrelevant, or exceedingly white. The fact is that there is so much there. Part of it is understanding where we are. If our students, I mean, I was in Philadelphia before, so trips to DC and New York and Boston, and those were common in Philadelphia for that matter.
Easy.
But they were easy to do. You could do day trips, but when you do those trips, we take kids into the Library of Congress and you look at Thomas Jefferson's library and you're basically looking at the works that you study in a classical school. I mean, regardless of what you think about what Jefferson was doing in his private time and those he owned on his estate, the bottom line is the guy was brilliant and we have a lot to be thankful for in terms of what we've gained from the ingenuity and how read those guys were. They were white guys, but if you walk through the Constitution Center in Founders Hall in Philadelphia, you'll notice that most of their occupations and their ages, that they'll strike you as the number of farmers that there were and also their ages. I mean, these guys were, many of them in their 20s and 30s, and yet profoundly impacted, the course of our nation and what we experience in our families, in our communities today.
I mean, the truth is truth, and it doesn't really matter the skin color of the person who's speaking. I mean, the Enlightenment is still the Enlightenment, and it doesn't really matter that, like, those ideas are still truth, and they're still universal. And anyway, tell me a little bit about it. And this is one thing. I really like school choice, and not even just talking about the policy where you might make vouchers available or something, but school choice in that we just have a lot of options, because a lot of places the public school's it, right? Either you like, whether you like it or not, that's where your kid's going to go, because there's just not another one. I like the idea of choice, and I like the idea of promoting that choice. Maybe vouchers are one way, but I think there's lots of ways in terms of public policy that we could support choice like that. But I also felt that way about the media. I came up as a blogger, right? So I got my started, spending the first years of my career banging on a blog, and nobody but my mother was reading. I really believed in sort of the democratization of the media. But I think right now we're kind of seeing the other side of that, where there's so many choices that people are able to just kind of go down their little rabbit holes. They don't have to talk to the other side. Fox News is telling you everything you want to hear. MSNBC is telling you everything you want to hear. Facebook and Twitter are designed on algorithms that's just to feed you content that's going to outrage you and make the other side look terrible. And so I worry, like with schools, are we going to create if we have a choice where, like, I'm going to take my kid out of the public school and send them to a conservative Christian classical school. I don't know that I want more ways for us to divide ourselves, if that makes sense. And I'm not trying to say that's what you're trying to do, but I worry that we're already all in our little cultural bubbles throwing pies at each other. I'm not sure I want to go down that road much further. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree with you more. Isn't that ironic? I mean, here we are. We're starting a school that is, in some ways, it's ideologically on one end of the spectrum. And some of the things that make it that way are the idea of honoring the original intent of people who write things. That's not just the Constitution we're talking about. I'm talking about great works of literature or historians of the past, like understand where they were at the time.
Like Mark Twain wrote Huck Finn, and he had a vision, and the fact that Huck Finn uses some language that to 21st century ears is jarring does not change what he intended to accomplish when he wrote that novel.
Right. Well, and what he intended to accomplish, I mean, quite to the contrary, is something that we should embrace.
Right.
And so the problem is we cannot create. First of all, I don't think the public schools, they struggle with it as much as we do, because every school has an ideology. Every school has a culture. Every community has one. And those who write the legislation or the policies at the board level that govern the school come from a particular perspective. And because of what's happening, as you mentioned, in social media and people who want to turn on Fox News 24/7 and get propaganda at times rather than journalism, or turn on CNN and get propaganda instead of journalism, it's a mix of the two, so it gets tricky sometimes. But we want our kids to recognize it for what it is. I mean, look, if the kids at Capstone are Team A and Team B is the kids in the public school or over at Oak Grove or some other school, I want them to be able to say, you know what, Team B's got a better argument than we do on that. I want them to say, hey, can Team B come over and sit with us and discuss this book? My concern is that Christian schools largely, and some that bear the classical moniker as well, are in indoctrination camps. They're the same way that those schools would claim that it's happening in some left-leaning school or public school. And what's offensive to us as the founding team here is that there are those who would brand us as being in that camp, calling us Trumpy. Or
I was going to bring that up. There was my fellow columnist Mike McFeely said your school sure seems Trumpy, and as somebody who does not like Donald Trump but yet isn't very intrigued by your school, I don't want to send my kid to a Trumpy school, right? I don't have a lot of respect for Trumpism, so.
I'm not sure. I would probably, like a Stoic, just fall on my sword if someone somehow associated my name forever with Trump. And I, on the one hand, McFeely's piece was I thought initially maybe helpful if you take Trump's approach to marketing himself. Any publicity is good publicity for that guy.
Right.
And I also thought, well, great. I mean, calling us Trumpy probably attracts a certain type of folk who might feel like we're their kind of school. But on the other hand, it definitely misrepresents what we do within the school. I think one could make the point and pretty logically and with great evidence prove that reason and civil discourse have not been the hallmark of the political scene since 2016. And maybe before then we had similar issues, but certainly we can't create a school. I
feel like we weren't as brazen about it, right? I'm just going to continue to lie, even though clearly I'm wrong. But I'm just going to lie and accuse everybody who's telling me I'm wrong of having some other agenda and they're out to get me. I mean, we've certainly been more brazen about it since 2016.
It's true. So there's a sense in which, because obviously, we're a Christian school, we're classical. There are very politically liberal classical schools. Classical education is not a conservative thing, but because we're Christian, and because largely private schools that are starting up right now are on the conservative end of the spectrum, people will assume that, and they would be right. And I think what makes us conservative is the desire to be independent. The value we have on freedom and choice and parental control, sovereignty of the home over the kids. Those kinds of things I don't think they're conservative ideals, but I think they're human ideals, but they're associated with the conservative.
That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't, as an atheist personally, I'm not afraid of sending my kids into religious contexts. It doesn't bother me. I'm not afraid of people. I'm not afraid of my kids being exposed to ideas that are divergent from my own. I mean, they're going to hear what dad thinks. And maybe what I'm hoping is to instill in them the basics so that, they can be honest and have integrity and be open and respect the right of other people. I mean, those are the things I want. And then from there, if they end up down a different road than dear old dad, so be it. Just as long as they get there honestly, I guess, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, we always say, well, I can't say I'm only speaking for myself, and I probably upset some folks who send their kids to our school. in the past. But I've always said to students, look, the truth doesn't have anything to be afraid of. So, if what I believe as a Christian isn't true, I'd rather discover that now. I'd rather not invest too much of my life pursuing something that's totally empty. And, I want our students to understand nobody's asking you to believe this or suspend your best judgment or not use reason. And I don't want you following me blindly into some place. And so I think it's important that it doesn't matter what your ideology is. If we were all saying, let's pursue truth, goodness, and beauty together for its own sake, we could come from a lot of different perspectives and enjoy that journey together. That's part of what I found in the students at Hillsdale, which is why I'm glad to partner with them to be a member school. That campus is full of liberal and conservative students, and they're able to have really great conversations. I mean, just go travel to Hillsdale, Michigan, and sit in the cafeteria and listen to the students talking. It's profoundly different, and I'd like to have a little bit of that here. I don't agree with everything that anyone at Hillsdale says or does. I don't agree with everything that every faculty member here will say or do.
Well, that's not the point. I mean, the point is to have the process and the rigor around it so that, we can, I mean, it's kind of what we were trying to do when the founders designed American society, our system of government, which obviously informs so much of our way of life, was not about making everybody get on the same page with religion and everything. Maybe some people were out for that because we had some states with established religions for a while. But I mean, basically we're going to allow a framework. You have to respect one another's rights, but outside of that, pursue life, liberty, and happiness your own way. Like that's the goal. Let's get, as we're winding up the interview, let's get into some logistics. First of all, there was another project like this, a school with this exact name in Utah. Are you guys affiliated with that? That came up in the article.
It came up in the news piece. Yeah.
Right.
No, in fact, I don't even know if our founding team knew that school was out there. But I did notice the other day, I was working with a guy on marketing, and he Googled, and that's what came up. It says permanently closed is the first thing you see when you you search Capstone. So I got on Google My Business and was like, let's get this straightened out. So hopefully people here in Fargo don't see that when they pull it up.
Now you guys are enrolling students for later this year for the fall school year.
Yeah. We're taking student applications now. We're 3 weeks into taking them. We've got, I think we hit 30 kids today applied. And so that's without marketing hard. So I think that word is going to get out through the actual marketing that will be doing.
Now to start, I mean, is there a specific age group, or because I saw that you were going to be adding one grade a year? Are you just starting with kindergarten, starting with the youngest and going?
We're pre-K through 6th grade in the fall of 22.
Okay.
And then, and we have students now enrolled in all those grades. So they're pretty small classes, so they need to keep enrolling. We will be open regardless of class size in the fall. And we're fortunately sponsored so that we can fund operations all the way through year 6, where we'll be in our new building, as we would say, Lord willing, 3 years at that point. And, when a new campus goes up, hopefully to open in the fall of 25, folks will say, oh, Capstone's real. Like, that's actually happening.
What about sports? I mean, maybe this is way early in the. I mean, you're worried about filling up classrooms now, not necessarily teams, but
well, the Coliseum's going up. We've got the architect lined up, and so it'll be a very authentic feel.
That would be ironic. That would be ironic for a Christian school to
build
the Coliseum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Given what the Romans did to Christians.
We like to say we're redeeming what's broken, so we're going to start with the Coliseum. But yeah, no, there's definitely going to be sports. The layout of the property has athletic fields, and like I'm learning that here in North Dakota we do a lot of co-op for sports that I thought you would field your own team for, but. Yeah, that's part of it. Sports there's a classical way to do sports. And so I think
because I remember, well, I even remember there were some kids that came over because I was in some computer classes. Computer classes as a 90s kid were fun because I had I had like a driver's ed teacher who was trying to learn HTML at the same time we were. But we had some kids who were coming over from Our Redeemers, which is a Lutheran school in town, and Bishop Ryan, which is a Catholic school. I remember them coming. They'd come over and participate in some sports or some activities that those schools didn't offer. So is that an opportunity for you as well to partner with I guess Fargo Public Schools or whoever.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to partner with whomever wants to partner locally. We'll have our own teams, but generally that can be easily done in basketball, right? You can easily have your own team in sports that don't require 11 to a side and pads and helmets but early showing say parents want football. So
yeah, well, that's weird. That's weird. I don't even know why I brought up sports. Like I've been very vocally not a fan of sports in schools, and I could go on a whole rant about our obsession with sports and some of the toxicity around that. But
Rob, there's a way to do sports that's all about the development of the person and the community, and not glory and for self and some kind of misguided notion that that's where you're going to find your destiny. So there's a way to do it where it's fully educational and intentional.
We just have fun. It's a game. Just go have fun.
Have fun and grow together. It's good, and it brings the community together.
Well, Paul, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Rob.
And it's great to great. And again, I like the idea of having people having choices and everything from where you want to eat to where you want to get your oil changed to where you're going to get your kids educated. Choice is good. So from that perspective, wish you all the luck in the world.
Yeah, thanks. Same to you, Rob. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.